I was born in the hungry 1930s. They weren't called hungry for nothing. People died of hunger. My family were poor. We were hungry. What's more, I had a very serious systemic heart problem, which has persisted with me all through my life. We had very little food. I went through scarlet fever. I also went with double pneumonia. Many Charles, you know things. But I survived. And I believe this was because my mother was a woman of great faith. And she didn't give up on me. So many people died of scarlet fever. I can vividly remember being carried out in a big red blanket when I was 3. So many things. Then the war came. And I maybe even could have died then. My family was torn apart. My parents remained in London. Our 3 children just went and were evacuated. I went to Northampton. I was extremely lonely because I couldn't play with the other children because I didn't have the strength. But then I discovered I could write. I could do poetry. I could do so many things. God gave me the gift of writing and communicating. You know, if we can't do one thing, God fills us with another. Then one day I wandered into a beautiful church, one of those which had flags from old wars flying inside and all this, that, and the other. It was most amazing. And I picked up a little card at the doorway. And when I sat down, I looked at it. And there Jesus was with little black children. Now, I'd never seen a black face, ever. Because what happened was I hadn't seen any in London, I hadn't seen any in Northampton, they were rare. But there was something in the eyes of those little black children which went to my very soul as an 8-year-old child. And I said, very quietly, when I grow up, I'm going to teach little black children all about Jesus. Simple as that. I wish the children were here because God never forgets prayers. He answers little children's prayers. Little children's prayers can have so much power. He never forgot my prayer. But I forgot his. I just forgot it. You know, life takes over. But when one day I was standing in Brixton and looking in the eyes of a very streetwise little lad, I instantly saw those little kids in his eyes, and he said, "Will you pray for me?" Little black kid, middle-aged white woman. "Will you pray for me?" And I was with Sister Thomas, who I'll tell you about later on. And we prayed. And the prayer came straight from the heart. No messing around. Anyway, over those 40 years later, took 40 years to fulfill that prayer. But it was done. I went home after 4 years of war. My parents missed us all, the 3 children. Just imagine, waving goodbye, not knowing, except for my little brother, he was going to an auntie. But for their other 2 children, they didn't know what was going to happen to them. 4 years later, they decided they couldn't stand it any longer, and they brought us back home. The family were not bonded. Did a lot of damage in the family. everything changed. But most of all, what we weren't prepared for was my mother was a very gifted medium, very well known. And as kids would come home from school, and as we were buttering our bread and butter and that, there'd be a whole crowd of mostly women sitting there in the kitchen, waiting to see my mother and saying, "Isn't she wonderful? She told me this and this and this and this." These were desperate people wanting to know what had happened to their son, husband, whoever. And always she would just passed it on. And it was so, so, so amazing. And I said to my mother some years later, when I was, because I was only 12 then, but a few years later, "How do you do it? How do you do this?" She said, "It's love. Love, true love is beyond time and space. You cannot stop love. It goes one end of the world to the other, faster than the internet." She said, "True love, real love. When I see these people, and when I see a woman and she sat before me, my heart goes out to her. And we, in turn, connect with their loved one." No, I can't. There's only very rare occasions she could see. She said, "I can't hear." She said, "But here, I know what to tell them." Heavenly Father reaching down, inspiring. He's in a prison camp. There are letters on the way. And always, 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 she was right. Every single time. She'd pray, and her faith was so strong, it brought me, as I say, through those early years. Then we'd sometimes hear somebody actually running past, so distressed. And she told me that was when the time when a figure just for a very short while built up between the woman she was sitting with. And she was able to describe the husband, "I'm so sorry, he's passed over. Would you just like to say I love him, goodbye?" And they did. Now in those days, there wasn't anybody who kindly told you your husband had died or been killed in action. They had a telegram. The ministry is sorry to inform you your husband, whoever, has been killed in action. That was it. And when the telegram arrived, and they had it there in their hands, they'd say, "Thank you, thank you, thank you for those extra special moments. Thank you so much." It always came back. So as far as I was concerned, she laid my spiritual foundation. As regards the spiritual world, when I learned the divine principle, they put the lot together. She was a small part of the puzzle. I had my experience. I knew it was the truth. And with every part of the divine principle being tested by my own experience. Then later on, sad to say, I got married far too young, had 2 wonderful sons, from which now I have 8 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren. The eldest is 24, so out of those 2 sons. But, and when they were in their teens, my husband and I parted, and my sons moved down to Kent and stayed, and I stayed until they were really able to take charge of their own lives and everything else. Then I moved to London. And I became a nanny, and on the first South London. And what happened then was that Practically on the first day I arrived, I just asked somebody, what happens here? And he pointed to the building and said, tomorrow they'll be having a steel band playing. I didn't realize it was a Pentecostal church. Church of God of Christ. And when I walked in, I was the only white face there, and all the others beamed at me. And I felt so much at home. And the more I got involved with all what was going on, the more I really loved them. They, gone was the British Reserve. We sang, we danced, we did everything. The church was crazy. And this, touched my soul. And they were so honest. I don't know if you watched the wedding of Harry and Meghan. And the pastor spoke directly to people, He really brought it to life. It wasn't just a, sort of usual sort of thing. And the pastor there, Pastor Campbell, used to say, please, 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 arrive early. You see your babies are dropping asleep in your arms. They didn't bother, and when it was Christmas, they all got together and everybody was included, and there was the, Black Eyed Peas, but all that sort of thing. I felt at home. Maybe it was because I hadn't had a proper home before. I was either in hospital or evacuated or something, but I felt at home, and I really loved them. Now, something very embarrassing, but I have to say it because it's part of my testimony. So please bear with me. Imagine how I felt as a very reserved white woman. One day there was a tummy bug spreading around. And so I looked at Sister Thomas, the one who'd found me originally, and I said, I'm very sorry, I'll just have to pop to the loo. And just as I was sitting down, they were all singing and praying for me outside in the most explicit way, talking about Joan and her bowels and every indelicacy going on, more than, and I clung on there. Then their two sisters said, you must come down to the front. The church has to pray for you, sister. And they literally dragged me out, kicking and screaming, forced me down there. And then all the crowd, the whole of the church, about 200 people, Joan and everything, all the indelicacies, but they were basic, and I was so embarrassed. Then suddenly I realized they cared for me. They were praying for me. They loved me as much as I loved them. And straight away I was healed. Warm flood, came through me. Jumped up, said, I'm healed. Then, of course, there was another, about half an hour going on, praying, God healed, and all from, Next thing, of course, I had to be water baptized. And when I emerged from there, first thing I said, we must tackle Brixton. Now, Brixton was only a very, very short walk down the road, as it were. They knew Brixton. Everybody knew what happened in Brixton. This was the time of the riots and the knives and the guns and the drugs. And there was this crazy woman said, we'll tackle Brixton. Well, they'd pray for Brixton, but only Sister Thomas would come with me. So anyway, down we went, and we went to Dexter Road. We went right down the front line, where the Bobbies walked 2 by 2, if ever they went there anyway. Went right down outside Dexter Road, and in that house there, they were exchanging drugs. I mean, doing the whole thing, like, free and all that sort of stuff. And there we saw the people around us were drug dealers, some out of the mind, some, all sorts. And, young men mostly, very few women. Then what we found was that, we just went there and stood, started praying and singing, and it went deadly silent. In their minds, they were back in Jamaica or wherever they'd come from. They were going back to church because the majority of them had come from good Christian families. And this was so sad, and they stood around there, and they, didn't say a word, and some even just put their heads down. Their hearts were touched by this pastor and this crazy white woman. Then after they drifted away, there was this little, about 10-year-old streetwise little West Indian, came up to us and said, "Will you pray for me?" And I was instantly reminded of the time that I'd been in that church as a child. I will teach little children, little black children, about Jesus. And we prayed, and it came straight from the heart and must have moved the Lord. And just afterwards, I just said to Sister Thomas, as we were basically coming down the mountain, right towards the end of the prayer, I said, I have a confession to make. Right to the very end after we prayed. Had an eye open just in case you took my handbag. She said, "Me too, Sister Joan," she said. "Jesus tells us to watch and pray." So anyway, after that, I had a wonderful time, with the Pentecostal church. And then one day I was sitting on the top of a bus in Crystal Palace, and a broken accent said, I was asking a woman sitting next to him, "Do you know where the martial arts place are?" And my mother always said to me, "Your tummy and your mouth will get you into trouble, And so I turned around and said, I can show you. And so we got off the bus. And I said, "Are you touring? You know what's happening? Are you here as a visitor?" No. I'm Joan from France. And I've come here, thank you. He said, as a missionary. And I was appalled. Missionary in England? And he said, "Yes," he said, "I've come to spread the good news about Reverend Moon." Now, I was in the media very much, with my writing. I wrote for newspapers and so forth and so on. And I knew all about the Moonists. They did everything except eat babies. And so I was, curious. There was this side of me wanted to know more, but the other side just a little bit whatever. And then he said, "Have you ever eaten Japanese food?" No. "Would you like to eat a Japanese meal?" Now, I imagined we would be going to a smart restaurant. Nothing could be further than the truth. It was down in Brixton, in Stockwell, Grantham Road. Just a flat. And it wasn't a very nice place, they were nice. And funny enough, I wrote for the newspaper that was 5 doors down, Afro-Caribbean Post. So they were there at number 5, the others were there, I think it was number 9, anyway. And so anyway, I went there, and they're all very kind, and the Japanese served beautiful food. And I saw every nation, it appeared, in that tiny, tiny, tiny flat. And because of my remembrance of the war, it touched me. I remember the German bombers going overhead, even when I was in Northampton on their way to Coventry. And I made a vow afterwards that I would not hate the Germans if it passed down generation to generation. Just as well I made that promise, because my elder son is married to a wonderful half-German girl. Her mother's German, her father's English. What would have happened if I hadn't made that promise? So much hatred still around today. So much hatred. But anyway, that was me sort of there. And they talked a bit about the principle. Made sense. You know, just the outline. And then they said about, you know, about workshops, weekend workshops. Excuse me, just take a little drink. Now, I wasn't prepared to go on a weekend workshop, to be quite honest. I wish them all well. God bless you all. You're doing a great job uniting the world, but not for me. I didn't say it, but I thought it. Now, I happened to let slip that Friday it was going to be my 48th birthday. I'd laid in rather late. I was living alone in a flat. And then outside the door came the twanging of a guitar and a French voice, and two French voices, Jean-Yves and Catherine, and Japanese. I think it was called Yoshio, but I know that you can't have an O after a male name. So anyway, Japanese brother. Happy birthday to you in broken English. I slipped on a dressing gown, and there I was. I let them in, had nothing better to do. They were already providing breakfast, well, sort of mini breakfast, I suppose about 10, sort of halfway through the day. You know, they brought food and cake. These people I didn't really know. And they sat down talking, twanging at the old guitar and all that sort of, felt so happy. And then my sort of little mind ticked over, Friday workshop, so I waited. And then, said Joan-Yves, today is Friday. So, my Japanese friend, day of the workshop. Just happens to be Friday on your birthday. We could take you there. Would you like to go to the workshop? So I said, and I answered perfectly, honestly. No, I said, I'm seeing somebody, and you know, later on today. And also I haven't got only £5 then to go to a weekend workshop. £5 necessary. God was watching. Phone rang. Everybody beamed. They didn't have to be told what was it. The person I was going to meet couldn't make it. And there I was, unwrapping my cards. £5 exactly fell out. And I knew when I was beaten. So down came the suitcase and off I went to Stanton Fitzwarren. Now the thing is, you know, the miracle, you know. The thing is, between my getting divorced and the Pentecostal church, I'd had 2 or 3 really pretty bad relationships. And so it was amazing, because I was looking for true love. I was looking for a true man. And those certainly didn't come up to the mark. So what happened was, between the weekend and the 7 days, I got 2 proposals of marriage. Wow. Yeah. But my knowledge of the spiritual world knew what was happening. And it was absolutely amazing. And, men and, this is what I wanted so desperately. I just wanted true love. And that was it, sort of thing. And I knew then that the spiritual world was working and saved me. So anyway, after that, I didn't wait for 40 days or anything. I joined the church. Now, it was rather amazing because the French were in South London, the Germans were in North London, the Austrians were down in Plymouth, and they were scattered around. The Italians were in Birmingham. Everywhere was scattered around. And I told the French I was going to join, but they probably didn't believe me. And so they were going to come around, and they said they'd come around and pick me up in their minibus and take me back to the centre. This is how I saw it. And they weren't turning up. So anyway, I got very annoyed, and I said, if you inefficient French won't pick me up, I'm going north of the river to the Germans. They'll be very efficient. And they said, no, Joan, no, we'll pick you up. Toot sweet, we will pick you up. And of course, they didn't really know what to do with me. I was the oldest person there. Most of them were in their 20s and come abroad and all that sort of thing. And it was, what would they do and that sort of thing. But I was eager to go and moved in. There were all different nationalities, and I always remember that, we were hyped up in the morning to go witnessing. And we did the choo-choo train. Can you remember the choo-choo train? Yeah, all lining up. Choo-choo, pow, choo-choo, pow. When I gave the similar talk to the youngsters in South London, I had them going all around the room, going choo-choo, pow, choo-choo, pow. And the idea, of course, was, tee people up to witness. And it was amazing, and I loved it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so I went out witnessing that, but I soon got, went away for 5 minutes. What happened was I found I was being ferried off to Lancaster Gate to be with the English, English family, and that sort of thing. And so I was very sad to leave the French. And what I deeply regret is that living in the centre, where so many different languages are spoken, I didn't take advantage of that. I should have listened more and picked up the language more and that. Anyway, my first mission, as it were, was councillors' conferences. Elizabeth Bates and Nan McMurdo, very strong Elizabeth Bates, but we all were, had this card. We went bombing around from city to city, setting up these councillors' conferences. And it was, quite revealing, really. Lancaster Gate paid for the venue. We provided the food and the extras, the flowers and so forth and so on. So we had to do a lot of fundraising. And it was great. We set a target. My first introduction to that was I was given a whole pile of New Tomorrows. Elizabeth Bateson said, sell these. I want to have the money by so-and-so. Whole pile. That was my introduction to fundraising. And she frightened me. So much so I was going in offices everywhere and I sold the pile. Just like that. And I thought, wow. And this is how it went. And we did this all over the place. And as soon as we'd finished one conference, we were ready for the next one, sending out the invites and everything. And it was amazing how moving it was, because we had not just councillors, but we also, county councillors and things like that, teachers, probation officers, and all sorts, prison ward, everybody who had that sort of job. And I always remember one teacher actually wept when he said it's so good to be able to share. The banquet was free and there was a nice piano playing it. Well, you know the sort of thing that went on, you know, sisters and everything. Then we moved on to the next city. And apart from that, of course, then I had, you know, time in PR. That was very revealing, public relations. But all the time, apart from these, you know, sort of missions, I had Brixton very much on my mind. And I knew I had to go back there. And just on my own. And one day I felt guided to go to Brixton, but not only to go to Brixton, I bought a whole bag of oranges, massive. Far too many to share back, you know, there. But a whole bag full. Hadn't a clue what was for. I walked down the front line and I saw all these chaps standing around Dexter Road and so forth and so on. And I suddenly found myself saying, catch, 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 catch. And they fell about laughing. Laughing is a great icebreaker. Crazy one. You know, they could have bought the whole stall of oranges if they'd wanted to with their drug dealing. But the ice was broken. Crazy. And I spoke to them and then regularly visited there. And I was told to use my white face because their beautiful drug den had been bulldozed down and they wanted a place to meet up in. So anyway, spoke to the council and we called it Afro-Caribbean Cultural Association, which was basically a big hut there with rooms and a billiard pool table. Not much cultural stuff going on there. But I was invited to sort of come along and teach them a bit of typing because their creation was absolutely amazing. They created poetry and stuff like this. And so I found myself in a room sometimes and just me and one other person so as we could have a nice deep talk. And there were many of them. Two I would like to tell you of. One was Leroy, pimp. He had 10 girls on the go. Big medallion around his neck. And so the pair of us sat there talking. I said, what do you want to do in 5 years' time? And he said, I'm going to be the biggest pimp in the business. I said, tell me, what is a pimp? Well, you know, Joan. I said, yeah, I know, you know. Tell me. Put it into words well. And it turned out he'd played around at school and he hadn't bothered at all. And so, of course, he left school. The only thing he was good at was seducing girls. He said there was nothing else for me to do. He said, now I've got a 3-year-old daughter. I suddenly realized what I was doing. But I've got no way of getting out of it. I said, now we're talking further education. And that's what he did. And there was a little girl there, West Indian, she was 5 feet, nothing sort of thing, Frances. And she came and we sat and we chat and she'd done everything, prostitution, stealing, dealing, you name it, the lot. And so she told me about it. We talked and then her so-called best friend arrived. Does Joan know what you're really like? Little girl drew herself up. She said, Joan says I'm a lady. Joan said, I'm a lady. And I said, well, what would you like to do? You know, when the friend had disappeared. I said, what would you really like to do? She said, don't laugh. I said, I won't laugh. She said, I'd like to become a probation officer. She said, because when I was in prison in Holloway, they had this, I met a wonderful probation officer, and she really, she really got through to me. So I said, why not? Because by now I was networking with social services and probation officers, a lot of people, Brixton, particularly in the town hall and all that. And I said, well, we can but try. I said, but you have the experience. You know what it is like. You can get through to other people like you. She said, would they find out? Do I have to tell them about my past? I said, you must. I said, otherwise, best friends will come along and tell them. And so I wrote off and I pulled a few strings so she could go and have training. Then the last I saw of her was sitting on a very high chair, twirling an ankle around. Now, when I was in Holloway, she was telling a whole load of probation officers. When I was, and they were looking awestruck. And she was very, very good at it. And there was also one young man who was pretty amazing. He turned up, and whenever he came to Akka, he would always dress up very, very smartly and carry a suitcase. He said, I'm not like the others, Joan, I'm not like the others. Then, much later on, he sold me an insurance policy. And I saw him in Bond Street, of all places. They were all just telephoning sort of thing. They all had their little department. But he'd made it. We mustn't be judgmental. They have so much to tell us. So when now I'm going to talk about the miracle of the Rhondda Valley. Because what happened there was that my father died and that, and I'd felt this calling and that, and I just was drawn to the Rhondda Valley. And I went there near Luigi and Aby, and there were others there. And Franklin Fortune appeared on the scene now and again. Oh, by the way, I started off this project when we were dealing with Brixton called Project Volunteer. That was another miracle because there was Julian Gray and myself sitting in the front office, looking at a video of what wonderful things they were doing in America. And how, they were getting people to volunteer and help each other, caring and sharing. And then what happened was that after we'd finished watching this, we'd been on the mountain, then we looked at each other, well, how do we get started here? Then a brother ran in and said, because we were in Lancaster Gate, he said, oh, one of the hotels is slinging out all its stuff because they're getting ready for the new season. And there were, beautiful settees, chairs, and goodness knows what. And so what happened, it was like a miracle. There was all the stuff already provided. So anyway, what happened then was that, much to David Franklin, was most upset because he could see all his lovely front cluttered up with all this furniture. So anyway, we got it in and everything. And that's how Project Volunteer got started. And we had a beaten up old minibus which Julian Gray drove. And I fundraised for the petrol every week. Now, miracles worked there. I remember standing outside a pawn shop in Praed Street, selling my One World. And I didn't stop anybody going in. I didn't stop anybody coming out. Just stood there. And I did this at the same time every week, just to raise petrol for the minibus. Then one day, the owner of the pawn shop came out and he was angry with me. He said, what are you doing? You've crashed my business. He said, nobody, we're having to close down. I said, I did nothing. I did nothing, I just stood there. God working. God works. And in another case, when I was fundraising, and I always made it, before I set out, I set myself the goal, £10, just enough for the petrol, take us from there to Brixton for the minibus. But I made it to be raised in an hour. But I also made it a conditions if somebody really needed to be spoken to, I would do that. I'd put that first. Then what happened was that I saw this punk coming. Don't know if you remember the punks. They're usually, chains and so forth and so on. But he looked very, very, very desperate. I caught his spirit. I knew what he was about. And I spoke to him, and he came inside, and from the money I'd got, which was only £1, bought a couple of cups of tea or something. And we talked, and he was going home, and he was going to do away with himself. And he was serious. His girlfriend had dumped him, nothing had gone right, and he was in tears and all that. So we talked and talked and talked. Just behind him I could see the clock going gradually up when the hour would be completed. We had people waiting at the other end. It was all sort of tied up. And he talked, and then suddenly he said, I feel so much better, Joan. Can I talk to you tomorrow? Yes, please. So he did. He came to Lancaster Gate. We did talk. And in the meantime, 3 minutes left to achieve a goal of £10, because I'd already spent one. An Arab floated by in his white robe, gave me £10. And I didn't want to cheat him. I said, this is a lot of money. Off he went. God works. God works. And, this is the most important thing. God really works. And then later on, but as regards the project volunteer, I'm afraid Mr. Franklin Fortune pinched Julian Gray to go on his fundraising team. We're friends today, but and I was also angry with God. How could you do it? How could you do it? But of course, God knows where he wants people. And I was left with the ministers, the church ministers. The hypocrisy. I would as soon have had one of my naughty boys in Brixton than some of them. I saw Canon Slee preaching in St. Paul's Cathedral from St. Albans. And what he was doing there was saying, all this wonderful stuff, and I came around later on. And then I heard him talking on the radio about the Moonies. And I phoned up, and I said, why don't you ask us some questions? I said, I'm one. Ask me anything. Oh, but you wouldn't meet me face to face. Yes, I would. You wouldn't let me in your Lancaster Gate, I'd never get out. Canon on the radio. Of course, the presenter, this was music to his ears. And he said, you wouldn't go to Lancaster Gate? No, I wouldn't go to Lancaster Gate. No, he's supposed to have God behind him, sheltering him. So I said, I tell you what, let me come to your church in St. Albans. Will you come? And the presenter was egging us on. Yes, I'll come. And I did go. And it turned out he didn't believe in the resurrection, he didn't believe in Jesus, he didn't believe in this, that, and the other. And he told me. I said, I've no objection to you having your own beliefs, but you're telling your flock that you believe in this. He said, yes. He said, but I have a pension, nice house. He didn't want to rock the boat. Hypocrites. So, that was pretty amazing stuff there. Then, of course, what happened was when my parents had died and I had £10,000, I was drawn to the Rhondda Valley, just a short way from Luigi and Aby. And I bought myself, it wasn't a cottage, it was an ex-miner's home, terraced, toilet in the back garden, as it were, you know, down there, no bathroom, no anything. Very, very primitive. But I knew I had to go there. And I preached in some of the chapels. And I also, what I did was I opened it up, and many members came down and just, you know, had a whale of a time just running over the hills. Because they were, some of them felt a bit burnt out, spent a weekend. And Derek, you know, was there with his wife and child and everything else. He was the one who taught martial arts. And he came, yeah, and it was amazing. He came along there, and it was wonderful because the tiny village of Tinnyworth, they loved the golden glow they had, you know, with black and yellow together. They bloomed. And there was Philip Abbey, I think he was, whatever, I forget the name, but he literally ran up the hills, and most people puffed. So they won the respect of the people there. And I had so many people come down there. Now, I had very, very, very little money. Very little money, I'm talking serious. But the money just came. But then one day I realized I really had run out in desperate times. And suddenly there was a man just knocked at the door, and I saw this chap standing in the pouring rain. He was the editor of the South Valley News, the Valley News. And he said, "I'd like to offer you a job, Joan, on my newspaper." Turned out we had a mutual friend. God works. Time and time and time again. But the most, you know, with miracles, with his miracles and prayer, we have such tremendous tools. And the greatest miracle of all, I think, was when it came when I wanted to move from there back to my family in Kent. Now my little ex-miner's cottage wouldn't even have, you know, the money I paid for that wouldn't have even bought me a garage in Kent. But the prayer I was just walking away from Luigi and neighbours, and we'd had a lovely time in that, but suddenly my heart filled. God, I so want to be back with my family in Kent. Just that, just as I walked. And immediately, I knew this would happen. Immediately, there was no doubt, just this gut feeling. So anyway, as soon as I got back home, I had a little amount of money, but I started to count. Put money away for the big move I knew would come. I wrote off to the Kent Council and asked, you know, if I could come, if they had a flat for me or somewhere or other. Didn't mind what part of Kent, didn't care. Ramsgate, Margate, you name it, any place, long as I would be able to get back to see my family. Back came the reply, no. Still determined, this was God's will. Once we know it's God's will, it has to happen if we put in our energy. I wrote again, begging, pleading, no. Then I looked at the signature at the bottom. It turned out to be a German grandmother, who was also separated from her grandchildren. She was in Kent, they were in Germany. Hearts met. God works through love. If you love enough, that's it. God, our Creator, it's all about love, 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 love. our hearts met, and within 5 minutes she said, "Leave it to me, Joan." Of course, that bit was solved. Then, when it came to the actual move, what happened then was that just as I thought I'd settled the removal people, they phoned up on the night I was packing. So we want £50 more. I still carried on packing. There in the back of my wardrobe, I found transparent little bank bags, the sort I mean, ready to go to the bank. Because I lived in a little village, I needed to go a long, long way away to be able to put it in the bank, so I just tossed it. I didn't know, I didn't know why I was putting it there. God knew. I didn't even have to count the money. And most amazing at all, and Franklin's visited me at home and knows where I live and, saw me in Wales. Within 3 months, I was within walking distance of my grandchildren, the grandchildren who needed me most. Within 3 months, wasn't a case of, going there with the church or something other, just feeling the urge. God works. They could have put me anywhere. And I had this flat where I'm living in now, sheltered housing. And, it's amazing. We underestimate the power of prayer. We underestimate miracles. We think miracles sometime in the past. And, so many things have happened. Now what I'm doing is I'm very much connected with the community because I'm with an organizer, with a charity called MED, and making a difference in Maidstone, and very much with the homeless and that. And I started a memorial service for the homeless who died. 24 on the streets of Maidstone in 2 years. Homeless died in the streets. We have so much terrible things, so many terrible things happening. And I also speak on LBC, now international talking, and we can do so much, my brothers and sisters. And anyway, I'll finish now. But as Sister Thomas would say, I'll pray for you if you'll pray for me.